that we have made progress. This is why I have panels like this, because I don't know how much progress we've made and how do we measure that progress if we're still trying to secure the right for minorities to vote 50 years later. So, who wants to start here? I mean,
I'll go
Michael.
ahead. Yeah,
Well,
I'll
no,
go ahead.
I'll give you a perfect example because we're both military people.
Yes, sir.
When I was in the military, it was don't ask, don't tell.
Yep.
Okay, but you still knew.
Yeah,
You you,
absolutely.
you, you, you you still knew. So now it seems like it's easier for you to be accepted as a gay veteran than I would even think of having a gay veteran in the foxhole beside me, even though he might be gay.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been progress from the legislative angle. The ability to serve openly without having to lie about who you are is undoubtedly a big step forward. But that doesn't negate all of the hate and the bigotry that's still directed toward the LGBTQ community. I mean, you know, if I look back, for me, I wasn't. I didn't come out. I was outed, and subsequently, as a result of that, lost contact with everybody that I was friends with, and that's okay. When you lie to people long enough, they're going to be upset when the truth comes out. And I didn't really have an option in doing it, but even now, I mean, you still hear reports of anti-LGBTQ bigotry on the basis. Even it's been what 7 years since it's been legal to serve openly. We see under the Trump administration, another wave of this anti-LGBTQ movement, which was the prohibition of trans soldiers from serving openly. So, while we make a step forward every so often, it seems like we take 3 steps back shortly thereafter. And as you were mentioning before, same thing with the civil rights movement. Why are we fighting the same fight that we fought 50 years ago? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense that we're once again fighting Jim Crow in the South. It's just a new version.
Melissa,
Well, yeah, I asked the same questions because I'm mystified that it's the same conversation almost, but it is different in that there's an awareness. I think more of an awareness that the fact that this is wrong, and yet it goes forward anyway. And I think a few things have been at work. Certainly, the 4 years of the Trump administration ripped the Band-Aid, ripped the scars of sort of superficial healing off the wounds. And it also gave license to people's articulation of deep set, whether it's racist or anti-gay or whatever those feelings were. It gave them license to be much more open in their expression. The oh wow, we'll just have some plain speaking, which just takes the patina of everyone getting along, buries it, and then people just spew out their hatred without any sense of impunity, or with a sense of impunity and without any sense that there'll be any repercussion for that expression. I mean, we literally had Nazis marching in Virginia with tiki torches and Nazi flags and Confederate flags. So this is just something that wouldn't have happened even 20 years ago. So the fact, in a way that would be more acceptable by a greater percentage of the population. Yes, we all went around like, oh my God, there's Nazis. But you know what? They were actual Nazis, and in much higher numbers than we've seen them in many, many years. I'm old enough to remember the Skokie Nazis in in Illinois marching and the hue and cry for that, and the whole discussion about the fact that the ACLU defended their right to march because of their First Amendment rights. And they did, in fact, march. But they were so excoriated, they basically stopped marching because it was so antithetical to what was acceptable behavior. Where we are now is everything goes, and people just let it all hang out and spew this hatred on multiple platforms 24 hours a day. And so what ends up happening is that rational thought, that folks who really are trying to live a life of social justice are on defense 24/7. It makes it that much more difficult to articulate and hold the line on what is a very clear practice. Like, everybody should have equal opportunity. That's pretty much a no-brainer. Everyone should have health care. Everyone should have equal rights for who they love and how they love, and all of those things that we say in the, liberal circles, but also beyond the liberal circles. Because, gay marriage, as an example, is the law of the land. And it is supported across the United States. So people we may have thought of who would never have supported gay marriage do in some form or another. When it comes, though, to the racial issues, in my opinion, the racism is so ingrained and so systemic in everything we do, generation after generation, where we give it different language. We use different language to express it, whether it's, fear of urban crime or crack epidemics or whatever the latest flavor of that is. It's still coded. And it just doesn't seem to go away. And now, again, in my opinion, with what happened under the 4 years of Trump, where this bandage of attempting to have civility and attempting to have conversation has been removed, it makes it that much more stark in terms of the absolute aggression to deny the right to vote to people, because it represents a kind of democratic opening of society that that a certain percentage of this country does not want to happen, because it means really taking a look at who has health care and who doesn't have health care, who has rights in the courts and who doesn't have rights in the courts. Why is it that a black boy of 14 cannot walk down the street without being attacked? And the fact that we're not addressing that, and not addressing it from a larger systemic process, just shows how far things have slipped in terms of giving us a real credible understanding of the United States as a democratic place where all its citizens are equal and everything else. Because clearly that is not what we are seeing and what we're living today.
Mike, I'm going to pick on you here for a minute. Because I find it, and actually you can blame this on Melissa, because she mentioned gay marriage or same-sex marriage. Why is it easier for people to accept same-sex marriage than it is for them to accept that I'm a black man?
White privilege. I mean, the face of the gay movement has largely been that of white cisgendered men, and as a result, that protection of white privilege has been extended to the gay community. I'm a white man, and I face discrimination because I'm gay. That's a truth that I can never deny. But the one truth that I can state without any kind of question to it is that the fact that I'm a white man has sheltered me from the reality of what people of color face in this nation every day. I will always have an easier time getting my civil rights because of the color of my skin.
But that all gays are not white.
But
So-
if you look at the gay movement that is primarily focused on within our media, you see the white cisgendered men. We don't see the trans women of color that are being killed on the street corner or walking home at night. We see the various white celebrities who are up there being the face of the gay movement. And if our face of the movement was more diverse, if we saw it was gay people of color stepping forward, fighting for their right to marry, the conversation would shift, because that white privilege protection that those of us who have been in the front of the movement are given has afforded us an easier path forward. Or at least that's my perspective on it.
Now, just because I didn't want to get an older point of view, I wanted to get someone that was young and fresh and actually was a member of the generation that we have kind of, to use the phrase nicely, fucked up.
I think we did part of that ourselves.
But we have Miss Juliana Flute. She is a member. Well, she's a student at Berkeley, which is totally different from the Berkeley that Melissa, you and I came to know back in our youth. She'll tell us a little bit about some of the changes up there. I think you are on some committee about minority retention or something like that.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So yeah, I'm currently heading into my senior year at Berkeley, and I worked for the Mixed Recruitment and Retention Center at Berkeley, which is part of Bridges Coalition, which is sort of like this overarching student coalition of students of color. So that's where you get like your Native American, your Black, Latinx, et cetera, et cetera. And so we work to recruit and retain like low income, first gen students of color, previously, just like students of color on campus. And so that's sort of the work that I'm doing. And I'm also studying African American studies at Berkeley. So, as well as science. I'm in microbial biology as well. So,
Now,
yeah.
another reason why I brought you on is because you are of mixed race.
That is correct.
And to show you that I've had long talks with your mom, one of the things that we discussed was, by your mom being white, you kind of felt that she didn't prepare you for being a Black woman.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, historically, women have been the keepers of culture, and so growing up with a single mom who didn't know how to take care of my hair or teach me that race is a thing and I should be, looking out for myself and my siblings was a shock when I entered the world by myself, knowing that my experience was not what I had been raised to be. So it was an interesting growth period, kind of stepping into the world. Yeah.
Now, the other member of my panel here, Mr. Bill Carroll, we share a military experience, not together, but the experience. Michael is also a veteran, but Bill, being a Ranger and also playing sports, I felt that inclusion for us had a whole different meaning, because being a part of the team, you did not have time, especially if combat forces. You didn't have time to just sort out whether this guy was Catholic or maybe he's Jewish, or maybe I shouldn't trade my pork and beans with him. I mean, so I kind of felt that we didn't have that type of exclusion out of the unit Now, inside the, inside the unit, out of the unit, it was a different question. I mean, you didn't go to Fort, you didn't go over to Phoenix City after dark. There were certain places in Fort Benning that you didn't go to after dark. But within the light, we're all soldiers. How do you feel about this new thing, inclusion?
Well, I mean, diversity and inclusion are not new things. They are as old as the first human beings deciding in some way that they are different from another group of human beings, right? From the moment that somebody said, "I think you're not me," right? You and I are not alike. That's how old diversity and inclusion and exclusion. Because unfortunately, you can't have inclusion without exclusion. I can't speak to exactly what your experience was, but I remember reporting that I had discovered discovered is the wrong word because apparently it was an open secret, but that there was a decent sized number of white supremacist, white nationalists at Fort Bragg. And they used to even like relace their jump boots, some of them. Like they would put red laces in, and you'd see guys with tattoos that I thought were suspiciously close to certain things, and guys ordering the Turner diaries to their APOs, no less. Like, these are not master criminals or whatever. But the shared suffering that sort of welds people together in certain situations is very situational, James. So as soon as the pressure that sort of stuck you together is no longer there, sometimes those fissures reemerge. I was one of a very small number of officers in my unit that were Black. There were a decent number of Black soldiers in the unit, but they were all either, non-commissioned officers or more often than not enlisted personnel. We didn't have a lot of officers that were Black or Hispanic. We had a couple of Filipino officers, a couple of Hispanic officers. The highest ranking one, I think, was a captain at that time in the regiment. So the command structure was almost uniformly white. And I had sort of this one other higher ranking Black officer used to joke around. He was my father-in-law, or he was my whatever, because he looked out for me. Because he knew that without somebody looking out for me, I was likely to have people put me in situations that would make me look bad. And there were times when people would try to set me up to fail. Once the pressure was off, when we were preparing to go to Panama, and the things that were going on there kept people from doing lots of dumb stuff to each other. But as soon as the pressure's off, there's no longer that thing that makes you focus, right? You have all of these very competitive type A. You mentioned being an athlete. I think something like 60-something% of my unit were athletes, either in high school or college. By the very nature of the kind of unit I was in, it was a bunch of like guys who had been cross-country runners or football players or baseball players or basketball players, or, so it was a bunch of athletes in the unit, which is an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is that, well, one is they are used to falling into a role, right? You're used to being, this is the position I play. Like, it's easy to get people to understand their job because they're used to being told, here's what you go do. The downside is that a lot of the negative things that happen in a locker room also happen in barracks, right? Including treating people badly who don't fit, who don't fit what you think they should be. I used to get kidded all the time just for reading books, right? Everybody gets a nickname, whether you want one or not. And I made the mistake one time while I was still an officer candidate. I went to Officer Basic Camp at Benning, and they said, say something about yourself. The whole thing, we stand up and sort of, once again, like we're an athlete, like when it's rookie camp or whatever. And I made the mistake of telling people that I had been in the junior company of a Shakespeare company, Shakespeare by the Sea, in my hometown. Well, I named from that point forward. You can guess it. Yes, Shakespeare. My first name is William. So nobody called me anything but Shakespeare from that point forward. So yes, it's a very close environment, like physically close. You're around each other. You're showering with each other. Like you're around each other all the time, right? But it's also a place that demands conformity. And so if you don't conform, and even the small ways, right? Little ways, can suddenly make you excluded in a very sort of odd, all of a sudden people look at you differently, treat you differently.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it would have been like to try to come out. Yeah. Now, in my day, you couldn't have. I mean, it would have been the end of your military career. But when I think about what a soldier in my unit would have been going through if they were dealing with essentially hiding such a big part of who they are. I mean, like I said, I got crap for reading books. So I can really not even wrap my brain around what it must be like for people who are dealing with a bigger issue when conformity is such a big part of making the unit work.
Juliana, things have changed quite a bit, between our generations. So, kind of, what have you taken so far away from this conversation about the changes that your generation has made and how we've had to deal with this kind of inclusion, integration, whatever you want to call it, from my generation down to yours?
Yeah. So I've definitely seen a big shift in the sensitivity of my generation, which is, people try and latch onto that as a defining factor of who we are. When I sort of look at it as a form of empathy, like connecting to another, trying to be aware of how the other person is feeling. And so that's a way that I see my generation kind of combating a lot of the prejudice that we sort of enter the world in and live through in our everyday lives. So it's definitely present. And in a place like Berkeley, where it's, everyone's trying to be as progressive as possible. Sometimes it seems like,
that tracks.
It definitely creates a community of being comfortable with who you are. So I definitely think that's a plus. And I think historically Berkeley has, been the place for that. So that's, very, very awesome. But at the same time, being in a place like Berkeley in the days now, where sort of the demographics have changed since, throughout the years, within that sort of empathetical view of the student body, you have these separations happening because of the change and fluctuation in demographic. You mentioned, Bill, that a lot of the men were athletes, and especially in Berkeley now, like when you look at the African American populations, and a lot of that is they're athletes. Berkeley is bringing them in to make money for the school, and so when you look at the overall number of Black students on campus, it's something like 3.4 now out of the entirety of the student body, which is really sad. But if you break that down into what percent of that are athletes, it's like half, maybe even more. So that sort of like isolates the Black student body on campus even more. And so that is, that's just like one example of how even like my generation can sort of be separated in our like empathetical view. So it's really quite sad to live in and be on campus with. So yeah, that's definitely one of the big observations that I've seen being in Berkeley.
Melissa, why isn't white privilege included Jewish white women?
Has not or has?
Has not.
Depends on what type of white Jewish woman you are. First of all, Jewish, and I say that being a white Jewish woman from New York.
Well, that's the reason why I asked you. I mean, it would have been hard for me to ask you about it being a Muslim. I mean, it was.
So, but New York City has its unique little place. But I mean, when I was a kid, so I grew up in the 60s. I come from a very weird family. not a typical American family in that my parents were activists in the ban the bomb movement in the 50s. My father went to prison in 1962 as a conscientious objector. So I have a unique perspective, and my early experiences as a 5 and 6 and 7-year-old are very unique, and it has absolutely informed my entire life, including, a social justice consciousness from a very young age, having been exposed to Quaker camps and all sorts of things of that nature. I was also Jewish, not necessarily raised to be Jewish, which is also a unique, complicated process. I kind of empathize a little bit of what you were talking about, Juliana, of having an identity that you don't understand. So that all having been said, I learned fairly early in my life on my block on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 1963 that being Jewish is something that people beat you up for and chase you and yell things like, you should have gone to the gas chambers. And you kind of go, oh, okay. That's interesting. What are the gas chambers? Figured that out really quickly. So it's a long way of saying that my understanding of Judaism or being Jewish is colored by the fact that it was never white. Meaning you were never part of the hegemony. You could pretend to be. You could act as if you were. But if you were overtly Jewish in any way, you're always going to be subject to othering. And I think that carries through to some extent.
Once again, I'm kind of calling on my experience because having lived in Jersey, I was kind of very familiar with the Red Bank area and around there. And you had, like you said, it depends on what type of Jew you are. I mean, we had the ones with the long.
Well, the Hasidic or very overtly religious Jews, which is a sect, and it's it's a small sect within Judaism as a totality, and it's informed by very specific historical factors in Eastern Europe. In the 15th century, the 16th century, I think it was the 16th century when Hasidim began, in part in reaction to the incredible intense prejudice that Jews suffered at the hand of Europeans in Eastern Europe. And then they just developed, it was essentially an ecstatic kind of religious practice where they could experience the joy of God within their everyday experiences. And they created these communities where they were very self-sufficient and created their own educational opportunities and so on, and lived in a very insular place and space as a protection against the larger society. When they came to the United States, in those large waves of immigration, most were integrated into sort of a more secular approach to Judaism. The large Hasidic communities that you see now in New York City are essentially post-war, and post-war meaning post-World War II, and in reaction to the annihilation of Jews by the Nazis throughout from 1939 to 1945. And their view is we are in fact, an insular community, and our only survival is through that process. So
Right.
That's a reaction, and you see that in the Black community, right? In certain groups that developed as a means of survival.
This is true, and also being my little Pittsburgh connection there, I also related to the Squirrel Hill area of Pittsburgh, where the shooting took place. So but Michael, we do seem, even though there's a leftover hate. I think that people are so busy trying to be politically correct with the LGBTQ community and making sure that you address them by the proper label, that sometimes we forget that these are still people, and they have, not only do they have rights, but they are a member of the community. They deserve the same protection as everyone else in the community. But do you think that also perhaps you have, I don't want to say ingratiated, but do you think that we're trying to progress too many platforms at the same time, or do we need to specialize?
I don't necessarily think that you can work on too many different problems at the same time. I mean, I think we're all capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. The fight for civil rights will never be solely focused on one group, but we, especially as members of the LGBT community, one thing that I've noticed, and I can only speak for myself, is that a lot of our movement has been very centered around white cisgender lesbians and gay men. And of course, in that process, we're leaving out our trans brothers and sisters and our family members of color. And that's not okay. The reality is that where we are as a community today is built on the backs of the Black Rights Movement, the 1960s. Loving First Virginia is one key part of why I had the right to marry my husband. The integration fight is what we're seeing now in regards to me being able to buy a wedding cake if I want to. And our community is so quick to be so focused on our own rights that we forget everybody else. And the reality is that if we forget the fact that discrimination and hate exists towards people of color or trans people or Latinos coming across the border to make a better life for themselves, that's going to come back on us one day. And I don't know, I can't tell you when that's going to happen, but where we allow hate to exist, it will always swing around like a boomerang and come back to cut us down.
Bill, I'll be back to you in a minute, but Juliana, I want to come to you because I put out what some people might call a rather scathing blog against Juneteenth. And the reason why it wasn't Juneteenth itself that I was railing against. What I was railing against is the fact that with one stroke of a pen, we can make a holiday. We can make a federal holiday. People get paid. The white guys get paid. Black people get a barbecue. And all of a sudden, Juneteenth becomes this political football, and we can pass this unanimously. But yet and still, I can't give someone that's waiting in line to vote a bottle of water. Somehow I think that, maybe it's just me, but somehow I think that there's been, something stupid happened here, for lack of a better word. I mean, it's okay for me to take off work, but it's not okay for me to help. Even a prisoner of war gets a bottle of water. So can you kind of tell me your feelings on this new Juneteenth, whether it's the 18th? What are your feelings on this?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely sort of an eye-opener, and for people that sort of sit back and are watching all of the the layers of racial disparity, someone like you, it does kind of look almost performative, you know. Like you're not really addressing some of the more major problems that we have in like our like systematic racisms and such. I'm also kind of going back and forth on this, but I lean towards sort of being grateful that there even is someone willing to recognize the times of change. But I'm also a little frustrated that it seems like there's a screen that's put up after something like this happens and passes. So yeah, it is definitely a double-edged sword. But as far as my experience, I'm grateful that there is some sort of recognition based on, with racial basis, I guess, historical racial basis.
Bill, am I just an old pessimist? I'm tired of just being grateful. You know what I'm saying? I mean, but I've been here almost 3/4 of a century, so but I mean, but it seems to me like I'm still saying, like wings over Jordan.
Well, both things can be true, James. You can be old and a pessimist, and be valid. So it could be yes to all. Here's what I've come to see, and part of it is maybe my training as a writer and a dramaturg, is that I begin to see how people use symbolic gestures, right? From when people say, why does it matter if you tear down a statue? What did the statue do to anybody? Well, first of all, if it didn't matter, why would someone have put it up, right? Symbols have meaning. They do. To this day, you can't look at certain symbols without feeling something. There are symbols that evoke strong feelings in people. Now, when I've known about Juneteenth since I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. My parents were very big on making sure I knew certain things, and I had a subscription to Ebony Jr. So I once again, I grew up reading. And so it's funny that Juneteenth has become the most recent, I guess, political football or whatever term you want to use, because you could pick on 1,000 different things. I mean, I remember 20-something, guess close to 30 years ago, when the Sturm und Drang was about certain states holding out on Martin Luther King Day. There's always going to be something, right? It'll always be something. While I'm not opposed to Juneteenth being recognized, it really is a classic case of, as my grandmother used to say, swallowing a camel and gagging on a gnat. We have this ability somehow to, get certain things done very easily, very quickly, while other things languish on undiscussed, let alone addressed, for, well, let me see, what time is it? Century. So it's very clear that when there's will, there's a way, right? There's a reason that people say that, because it's true. We have not had the political or social will in this country to look white supremacy, to look sexism, to look homophobia dead in the face and say, this isn't wrong because it hurts those groups of people. It's wrong because it weakens the fabric of its entire society. Like, for your own selfish reasons, even if you don't care about those people, and you should care about those people, you should care about the fact that your entire society is being weakened by the fact that we can't work together because there's still people who won't recognize other people as fully human. And if you can't see everyone else, even if they're not exactly like you, as fully human, your society is slowly unraveling. When people say, gosh, I wonder why we can't get blah, blah, blah done. Not that mysterious, right? Not that hard. As long as there's still this sense that, well, I'm not just different from you, but I'm better than you because I'm different from you, we're never going to move, right? We're going to be stuck in this endless cycle of, oh, now what horrible, outrageous thing has happened? some of the things are so simple, right? I mean, like, now simple doesn't mean that it's easy, right? Unfortunately, but most of these things are simple things. If you were able to truly, first of all, and I'm an educator, I don't want to go down a very long, dark path of how badly we teach a bunch of subjects in America, but because I mean, I recently read a bunch of stuff about how we stack up, amongst the world in terms of teaching certain subjects, and we recently got our butts handed to us by Costa Rica in a bunch of subject areas. I wish I were joking. I really do. I wish that was like a punchline, but it's true. Like, we're getting skunked. I mean, almost every major industrialized nation does a better job of teaching certain things. And part of why we have so much trouble with people who are transgendered and homosexual and lots of other things is because, one, we teach sexual education incredibly poorly. Incredibly poorly. There are states where it's like, don't do it, but if you do it, put a condom on, we're done. I mean, like, that's like, we do a terrible job of teaching a bunch of things. We do a terrible job teaching history. We do a terrible job teaching math and science. I don't want to go down this path. But the point is that we throw children into school. We have a bunch of things we care about testing them on, and we push them towards getting at least a decent number on those things. Anything that isn't measured on certain tests, if they learn it, it's cool, but that's not, we don't care. We don't really care. If you pick that up, that's nice. So history is not one of those things that's the really important tests care about, right? We want to make sure they have the basic language arts. Can you get a decent score in math? A little bit of science sprinkled on for flavor. And we test for those things, right? We have a bunch of tests at third grade, fifth grade, eighth grade, and then, junior year of high school. And then we see, certain numbers. It's like, okay, your school's hitting above or below this line, and bad things happen if you're below this line. Good things happen if you're above this line. And anything that doesn't deal with that line, that number, we don't have a holistic approach to, well, anything. So when people realize, hey, there's a problem here with how we socialize children, how we teach children, how we nurture children. And ironically enough, despite the quote unquote pro-life movements we have in this country, we have terrible prenatal care for a major industrialized nation. I mean, once again, Costa Rica's pounding on us. Like, how are we so bad at these things? We're like number 19 in infant mortality. How is America number 19 in infant mortality? We have a quote unquote pro-life lobby that is raising tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to lobby and do the other things, but somehow they can't manage to children that people want to have aren't getting decent prenatal care. We are a truly backwards country in so many ways. So yes, James, you are old, you are a pessimist, and you are right.
Oh, well, okay. Hey, 3 for 3. I'm good here. Melissa, history that Bill mentioned, I hear a lot of, I never heard of that, or did that really happen? Did we burn history books between our, after our generation or something? I mean, I learned about the Holocaust. I learned about Custer. I learned about the Tulsa Massacre. I knew who Booker T. Washington was. I knew about John Lewis, even though he was a very young man then, but, Stokely Carmichael, Black Panthers, almost. When it comes to educated, I think that we were at least given the basic principles, and we learned, or at least we were taught. Now, whether you learned about it or not, but at least it was in the book.
Well, we were certainly taught, not all the things were in our textbooks, but we were taught critical thinking. It was not a dirty word then. Intellectualism was not a dirty word in the 60s when I went to school. In my public school, we read the newspaper every day. We had the New York Herald Tribune in the I think we never did get to the New York Times. They thought the Herald Tribune was about right from the 4th grade to the 6th. And we read it every day. And we had to we had to understand what the news of the day was and be able to talk about it, but also be able to relate it to history. So the question, if there was something about the civil rights in the newspaper, we'd have to say, well, how does that relate to the Civil War? Or how does that relate to, okay, the promise of the Emancipation Proclamation? So we were taught that facility. We were challenged to not necessarily believe what we read. Are you sure that what it said is true? So that was one of the key things, was the ability to critically evaluate what's in front of us. Is it really true? Is it something that we see with our eyes? Is this something we can believe? Is there some other source that we can go to verify or to expand our understanding of what's being spewed to us? I'm a little bit younger than you, James. So for me, Vietnam as a child was a TV experience. We'd sit down, we'd watch the news, and there was this steady stream of dead bodies and the statistics of how many soldiers were injured, how many soldiers died. That was on the American side. And then the number of Vietnamese that were killed. South Vietnamese, North Vietnamese. So this was something that we experienced in real time, just as we experienced in real time the effects of the civil rights movement, of what was actually happening in the streets. And this was unfiltered. And then we would read about it, and then in schools we would talk about it. So it made for us, I mean, in a similar way to the way kids may be reacting to the experience of the last year. And I make that analogy of the George Floyd, everything that happened after George Floyd's murder, and people taking to the streets, and the opportunities for younger people to interact with that and to begin to think critically about that experience. But for us, it was just pretty much just normal education in a public school. And meanwhile, we were 35 kids in a classroom in my day in public schools in New York City. So it's not that there was some special, emphasis on education. It was the minimum, in the sense of the ratio of teachers to students. But there was a real sense of responsibility that the teachers felt to help us navigate what the world was and what our place in it could be by thinking critically. So I think that was a very important aspect of what education was about at that time. Not obviously in all places. I can't speak to, what happened in Mississippi in 1966 in that education. But I can say that certainly where in my experience in the Northeast, that was very much a part of what we came to understand, and also came to I think the word you used was, Juliana, was empathy, but we came to have an understanding of an empathic experience. We saw ourselves in those people that were being murdered. We saw that could be us. And so it engendered a kind of a sense of consciousness. I'll also say that, with the women's movement on top of that, so quickly behind it, there was this process, it used to be called consciousness raising, where you're sort of trying to unlearn the patriarchy to relearn a different definition of what it meant to be a woman or what gender meant. And I have looked at what's been happening again in this last year, and I see the same kind of thought process of sort of unwinding people's heads, even old people my age, of their prejudices or sort of re-examining and rethinking their own language to have a clearer understanding of what's really unfolding in front of them. So there are these little pockets of opportunity and hope, but to go back to something that both James and Bill were saying, you know, when you have a situation where, yeah, we're going to give you a federal holiday. Oh, how cool. But HR 1 languishes and we still don't have the right to friggin' vote. And every goddamn day, some other state is stripping the most basic understanding of democracy, of what we were all raised on, the right to vote. Oh my God. What the hell is that? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Juliana, I'm going to come in and kind of pick on you here because Berkeley, I mean, you know, when you start talking about intellectualism and, you know, where all some of the radical things started, you know, even like feminism, for instance, I mean, you know, a lot of those things came out of schools like Berkeley. You know, as a matter of fact, I believe at you know, at the time that we were complaining about how CBS News was making us baby killers, you know, Berkeley was one of the ones that was saying, you know, let's stop the war now. You know, so you know, but in the meantime, my buddies are getting killed back here. But anyway, that's another subject, different time. But dealing with just the intellectual part. Going to a school like Berkeley and being a minority, not only in race but in gender, how far do you feel, or has there been any progressive movement in Berkeley that has really changed things as they did in the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, right now, there is definitely no huge pressing movement as big as I think some of the ones, the movements in the 60s were. And it's almost sometimes because the population of minority students is so low, it almost seems like there's like a butting of heads in intention, because so this was a point that I sort of was thinking about as you were talking, Melissa, about your education and how you are all together learning about world events and putting yourself in the shoes of the people that are being affected. Whereas I think now, at least in my experience at a top university, the students that are coming in are not coming in with the mindset of let's learn about the world. They're coming in with the mindset of I need to be at the top prestige to make the most money and get the best job. And so it's sort of retracting away from the common goal of let's come together and sort of better ourselves. And it's focusing more on like the individual, how much money can I make with this title of UC Berkeley, you know? And so that separation of mindset makes it harder for the students who live and experience the disparity to come together. And sometimes it seems like we're trying to convince our own student body that these are important pressing issues. So it's definitely not, it doesn't seem like there's a common understanding of sort of world events and how we should be pushing for that, like the 60s. Not to say that they're not, I mean, there are plenty of groups that are constantly out on campus trying to get people engaged and teach and, you know, make that understanding. But the majority of the student body has the mindset of let's make money, you know, let's get that label, that UC Berkeley label, which I think makes it really hard to gather as a group of students.
Bill, you want to jump in there? You got any thoughts on what anyone has said so far?
Well, so as a, I guess, retired student activist, so when I came back from my time in uniform, I went to graduate school, and I was at the University of Illinois, during a particularly active time in its history, I was a member of a group called If Not Now, and we did a bunch of things. We got into all kinds of things. At one point, we were putting pressure on the Daily Illini to add people of color to their editorial board. We were trying to get the school to change its mascot, which eventually it did after many battles around that. So I got my first opportunity to have like 70-year-old people give me the finger and spit at me. That was exciting. Yes, at one point I was a one-man boycott of a Shell station back before Shell had disinvested from the apartheid government of South Africa. So yeah, I got involved in a bunch of different things in terms of student activism back in the day. But as Juliana just said, there was this sense of urgency and focus that something about drafting people to go die in a war in which they do not agree focuses people's minds apparently in a way that everything else tends not to, I guess. So we would have lots of people with lots of, I almost forgot. So I also was sort of a non-member, but whatever. I just sort of got sucked into some things I wasn't even particularly a member of. I did get recruited by Captain Barry Romo into what used to be called Vietnam Veterans Against the War, which became Veterans Against the War. So I was involved also in protesting the war in Iraq. But and then I wasn't really a member of SEED, but I dealt with some stuff that sort of circulated around ecological racism, which is not discussed nearly enough. But if you ever want to find, like certain kinds of industry and where they dump things, they rarely dump them in nice neighborhoods. I'll put it that way. Like I can pretty much guarantee you, if you show me like which census tracts have what level of income, I can promise you certain ones of them will not deal with, farm runoff or all the other things that are destroying people's quality of life, and you get these cancer clusters and all sorts of things that happen, but they don't happen in nice neighborhoods. But student activism is particularly challenging. One, because these people are going to college, right? So being a college student by itself is uses up a lot of your personal, emotional, physical bandwidth. Plus, I was a little older because obviously I'm coming from military service, but most of the people are 18 to 23-ish, which is a time where focusing is challenging because you've got lots of stuff coursing through yourself, right? Questions of identity and literal hormones and all these other things are happening all at the same time. And so it is also a time people have these awakenings of various types. But sometimes you'll have a bunch of them and they'll stack on top of each other. And so, I just discovered that I'm bisexual, but also I'm against this and I'm for that. And so when someone says, hey, we're going to go protest, this is like, I'm doing these other 4 things, right? So God bless student activists. It is once again, forget cat herding. It's more like ferret herding. It is ludicrously difficult and unappreciated. So, anyone who does it, God bless you. A salute from me. But yes, college students now, there's not a one thing, right? There's not a thing. There's not sit-ins, Freedom Rider, like this thing where it's like everybody's focused on that. That's gone. There's not a Vietnam War. There's not a thing for everyone to coalesce around. There's 87 different things going on once again simultaneously, and to be, I can understand when people say I get allyship fatigue or whatever. I don't really have sympathy for it, but I understand it. People say, "Oh, I'm worn out. I'm all out of empathy," or whatever. It's like, okay, but I understand. I don't excuse it, but I understand it because there's all these different things. It's not like there's just one thing. You can't just focus on the Negro problem or whatever it is that people used to be able to say. Here's the thing we're all going to focus on. So I get that, but like once again, if you hug your local with consent, hug your local student activists and let them know they're appreciated.
Michael, what does inclusion, what's the difference between inclusion and integration when it comes to the LGBTQ community?
For me, I would say the difference would be equity. You can include us and tolerate us, but if we're not equal in society to what you get to experience as heterosexual people or cisgender people, then we're not really included. It's not inclusive. We're being excluded in one way or another. So, regardless of what group or marginalized group you may be part of, equity is part of the key of inclusivity.
Well, now, Melissa, this takes me back to one of the stories where we heard, the lady that had her house appraised, and then she took out everything that had to do with black, and the house was appraised almost twice as much. I don't know if you've heard that story or not, but and also Juliana, I'm going to using your mother as an example. She was saying that a lot of things that happened in high school, like with your brother, for instance, was handled much differently when they found out that she was a white woman rather than a black mother. So, how do you kind of get back to, Bill says, there's a lot of things on our plate, but then again, you have Michael that says we can, walk and chew gum at the same time.
Right.
Well, can we chew more than one piece of gum?
To me, yes. I think you have to, if you step back and have as a premise that what we want is a socially just world, and in my view, wrap many, many things within that umbrella, in the sense of saying inclusion, not just inclusion for LGBTQ people, inclusion for immigrants, and I'm talking about America, obviously, right now. Inclusion for poor people. We don't even talk about the socioeconomic issues. We talk about race, we talk about gender, but we also don't talk about classism and the fact that that's still very, very much part of our experience. And we forget, even in these different types of communities, what the difference of class and socioeconomic status has on all of those experiences, and they will be different. So I think if we start to really begin to speak what the real truths are and start to embrace it as part of a large arc of inclusiveness, of social equity and social justice, where we can start to tease out environmental issues, healthcare issues, access to legal opportunities, access to fair and equitable education, we can begin to see what that umbrella will look like. One of the things that really impressed me this year in terms of the kinds of political actions that have happened that began to center around George Floyd, but have really grown, certainly in New York City, over the last year, is that change in language to be much more focused on the larger arc of social justice and beginning to put these different slices of the pie into what that is, Native American rights. The notion of BIPOC as a much larger understanding of color, that it's not just Black experience, but it's Hispanics, Black, Native Americans, and being able to see what the affinities are of negative experience, but also positive experience, and being able to see how to build the bridges to communication so there isn't that exhaustion anymore. But again, building larger arcs of understanding and clarity to begin to tackle what is one big giant mess. And in my sense, understanding a true fight for the heart and soul of the existence of the United States of America at all. Because I, like you, James, I have a dark view, and I see us teetering. We're like to me, this far from fascism, this far from just walking away from it entirely. And so it really does hinge on our capacity to make these linkages and to sort of suddenly sit up and say, wait a minute, I count too. I do have the right to give. I do have the right to complain. I do have the right to be out here making demands on the folks who represent us in Congress and all, whether it's the large elections or the small local places, and demand change and make that change positive towards a better understanding of who we are as a nation in its entirety.
Juliana, I have one problem with what Melissa just said. And I think is that one of the reasons why we are in such conflict about color is because we no longer have classes. I think that it's only rich and poor. We used to have a middle class, but I don't think we have a middle class anymore. And I think that's the reason why now the animosity, instead of, whether or not, poor, middle, rich, now all we see is black and white because, as you said, it's all about the dollar. It's not about the humanity. Your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with you that the socioeconomic status is stratifying right now intensely. And I think that is sort of one of the reasons why we are, at least reflected in Berkeley, like we are seeing a bigger struggle to sort of gather together because of the money. But I do agree with Melissa on sort of the overarching focus of inclusion, because I think there is something to be said about having one common goal as social justice. And I'm still trying to work through like how that is being reflected in a socioeconomic class as well, because it's stratifying. We're entering late stage capitalism, which is really hard. It's new, as far as being in the experience in America. So, mm-hmm.
What do you think, Bill? Do we still have a middle class, especially within the black neighborhood?
Well, it depends on how you define middle class. If middle class is a state of mind, then the answer is still yes. Because if you ask people have a tendency to think they're middle class, even if they're rich or poor, right? People tend to think they're middle class because they feel like they should be, right? If it's a mentality. There was a time when if you made $20,000 a year, you could support a family of 4 on that, buy a house, send your kids to college with 0 debt. And it wasn't like a million years ago. I mean, I'm talking about probably the late 50s, early 1960s, right? $20,000 a year was good money. And by 1970, you needed to make about close to twice that to have the same lifestyle. Now, if you're a family going on $55,000, $60,000 a year especially in a major metropolitan area, you're scrambling and scraping to get by, to pay all of your bills, and maybe put away money for retirement, maybe, right? You're driving an Uber on the weekends, so that you can take a vacation. The cost of living has far outstripped. I mean, far, like 190 something percent, I think. I think cost of living has increased over average wage growth since 1970, something depressing like that. So when people talk about, the fight for 15, I mean, one, why are we fighting for 15? I mean, 15 is still, you better have 2 wage earners even at 15 if you're trying to live reasonably well. Now, Juliana, you're in Berkeley. my sister used to work in the special collections there, but she lived in San Francisco. God bless her. And she used to tell me these horror stories about what, like I saw the place where she was living. It's like, you pay that for that? I mean, it was. I mean, it's funny because it's sad. It's sad because it's funny. It was this very older, what they call like floor through apartment. So it's not quite even a. There's like 1.5 bedrooms, kind of, but like the kitchen / living room. I mean, it's like 4 rooms, right, and like a multi-purpose rumpus area or something. But it was.
Your bed goes up into the wall.
It was almost that bad. Yes, they did kind of a Murphy bed, but it was pretty bad. And when she told me what they were paying, it's like you could buy a nice house for less than that in terms of what you pay for a month in lots of places. When a person gets a degree in anthropology at Berkeley, right? Assuming they have a giant wad of scholarships, they're leaving school with what, about 88, 90 something $1,000 in debt, Juliana?
Depending on how much help they get, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Now, God willing, you get a great job, like at the Smithsonian, right? I mean, somewhere close to the top of the food chain. Because if you end up, scraping together like 4 or 5, teaching 4 or 5 different classes at somebody's community college or something, you're going to die long before you pay off your education. So the world has shifted. So we still use the term middle class, but to quote Andre the Giant's character from The Princess Bride, it does not mean what you think it means. The term middle class, we still use it, but it doesn't mean to be in the middle financially anymore, right? Because unless you are doing very, very well, and even those people think they're middle class, unless they're, stupid plutocratic rich, I think those people realize they're not middle class. But people have a tendency to think, like I said, that they feel like they're middle class. But we are all, unless you are really doing well, struggling. I constantly think, oh God, my kid's going to college in 2 years. What am I going to do, right? And there's never an easy solution. I'm an educated man, right? I've had good jobs, but I live in a major metropolitan area, and nothing is cheap here. But it's not as bad as San Francisco, so I've got that going for me.
Move to San Diego if you think you got it bad. Move out here.
Yeah, I'm saying it's bad but it's bad everywhere, James, right? It's bad everywhere. I mean, obviously there's places in the Deep South and places in the Great Plains areas where it's not as bad, but nobody's doing as well as they, quote unquote, should be doing. When they think of how their grandparents were doing, who had way less education on average, but were able to support sometimes on one income, support an entire family, send kids to school, buy a house, all that stuff. Juliana, I'm sure you've read the depressing numbers about the chances of someone born in your age cohort in terms of owning a home, right? Yes, right? I mean, this used to be considered something that middle-class people did. Now, the rich own their homes, right? The middle class rent. and the poor can't even do that. And the poor work, right? People have this thing in their mind that poor people don't work. The vast majority of poor people work. Some of them work more than one job, but the jobs make sure they don't give them enough hours, right, for them to get benefits. So I deal with students who work 2 or 3 jobs that give them 12, 14, 16 hours, right? So that way they want to make sure that, one, that you can't get too established and get comfortable or whatever it is, but also they avoid paying you,
Benefit.
paying you, but giving you benefits. So
right.
It's tough, man. It is. It's never a good time to be poor in America, but man, it is a really bad time to be poor in America right now.
Michael, is there some kind of misconception in America that inclusion or integration means that you have to like me?
I do think that. I mean, I think everybody is under the impression that for us to extend equity to one another, that we are going to be, best buds calling each other every day. The reality is I don't care if you like me. I don't care if you hate me, but you will treat me with respect. I'm a human being worthy of that dignity, and and that's all I want. I don't want you to lay flowers at my feet or roll a red carpet out. I just want to be treated like a human being, and I think every human being is entitled to that.
Melissa, how do you reconcile that in the Black community when we spent so many years as being only 3/5 human? I mean that's according to the Constitution.
Well, yeah. I mean, you read the history of how that came about and the compromise and the original sin of the United States, precisely because of how that happened. You have to recognize that in my opinion, from my perspective, there has to, when South Africa was apartheid was finally rid of, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was created. And it gave everyone, black, white, whomever, the opportunity to come before the commission and speak their truth. And this included prison guards who tortured and murdered people. It included policemen. It included average citizens, black citizens, white citizens, didn't matter. And there was this opportunity essentially to speak their truth, speak their feelings as a way of healing and reconciling. And out of that, creating a new equitable society. In my opinion, I think that is an absolutely critical path if the United States is ever to move forward as a nation, and in particular, to right the wrong of the original sin of this nation, which was allowing slavery to be embedded in the Constitution by creating this concept of the 3/5 of a human being, and by allowing slavery to be legal. So I think that's the only way forward, is through that kind of a process, whether it's institutionalized in that kind of a setting or some other kinds of settings. But I think as a nation, we have to recognize this wrong and what it has done, how it has gotten into the DNA of a people, generation after generation after generation after generation, to where we are today. I'll use an analogy. There were, in the beginning in the early 50s, the post-war era, there were housing projects that were built very quickly and very cheaply in the worst parts of New York City, the environmental dumping grounds, to your point, Phil, which today is like, why do all these kids have asthma? Duh. Okay. So these buildings were put up very cheaply. They would do things like
asbestos
everywhere. There were things like why would you they didn't put doors on cabinets or closets. It was like, well, they don't need that. They, meaning the poor people coming up from the South and coming from Puerto Rico, who were settling in New York City, and the people in neighborhoods where these enormous highways were being built in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, who were then relocated to these inferior housing projects where there were no stores, no resources, nothing, dumped in the middle of nowhere, no subways, no schools. And things like a 12-story building with an elevator, except the elevator only stopped at every other floor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
sounds like Texas.
Yeah. So here we are. It's now 60, 70 years later, people are still living in these buildings. But it's now third or fourth generation of degradation in these buildings, climbed and filthy. And people, and to your point, people are working who live there. It's now under the guise of the New York City Housing Authority. People work. They go to work every day. They work these horrific jobs to maintain living in this. And they're third, fourth, fifth generation living in this housing establishment. That horror is in their DNA. It's in their bones. So that's just one microcosm. Now take that over the history of this arc of history from 1619 to today. And the answer is yes. As a nation, we have to recognize this. We have to come to an understanding of that and move forward from that truth. And all accept that what that truth is and open it out, blast it open. Because that experience is horror. And it has to be recognized to move forward. Again, in my view, how I see it.
Juliana, you come from a mixed marriage. Do you feel that, as we kind of touched on earlier about your feelings as far as your mother not preparing you to be a Black woman, did you feel growing up that you were growing up to be a Black woman? Or how did being a mixed race affect your sensibility of who you were growing up?
So it was, so I definitely didn't feel that I was being prepared to be a Black woman. But
when you looked in the mirror, you knew you weren't a white woman.
Yes, that is true. So growing up, I felt extremely isolated because I knew that I wasn't being treated the same as all the other white kids in the school. And I knew that I didn't know what I was doing with like who I was and how I looked on the outside. And coming home to a place where it wasn't even a conversation being had, really put me in a very isolated spot. And really it was only my siblings that kept me sort of up in spirits about who I was as a person, because I knew that they were people that also shared the same experience as me. And I also grew up in a predominantly white area, which can also sort of affect your identity if you have dark skin, anything darker than white. So yeah, entering or leaving that space, I was leaving with a very isolated mind as far as identity goes.
Melissa, I know it's getting a little late for you up there in New York City, so why don't you give us your final thoughts, and we hope to have you back on our next discussion of inclusion.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this show. It's really been very, very helpful for me in my own growth to hear everyone's and what the perspectives are, because it helps to expand my own. I am very passionate about the inequities in our society and the need for change. And I really, again, just appreciate the opportunity to talk through what these issues are and help us come to consensus on how to move forward to make us, what our promise is for us as members of this society. So thank you again, James, for inviting me.
Hey, big fight for Michaela the other night.
Yes.
We're gonna have to get you on, talk a little boxing.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk a little boxing.
But thank you so much, Melissa. You want to tell people where they can find you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Girl Boxing now on Twitter and on Instagram. I I'm the author of A History of Women's Boxing, and which is another whole interesting thing in itself, figuring out the role of women over 300 years in a masculine sport. But I do write periodically, and as I said, I have a very active Twitter feed, both on boxing and on social justice issues. So, wins me some people, loses me others. But again, thank you so very much, and hope to speak to you all soon. Okay, good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. You're right.
Bye-bye.
Melissa's out on the West Coast. The East Coast, of course. Bill, you're over there in Chicago. So, Bill, you want to give us your final thoughts on this discussion about inclusion and how we handle it moving forward?
Sure. So I work in education in the non-for-profit space now, and it is a place that's actually dominated by women of color because, it's not-for-profit. Who better to work in areas of struggle than women of color, right? I am one of one men, actually. We used to be two, and then we were back to one, and then we hired another. We can't seem to keep men. So I'm back to the only one again. I had to remind myself. But it is so interesting to me that in these places of struggle, where you find who stands in the gap, right? Women of color. Who accepts the challenge of doing the thing that nobody wants to do? Working with the poor, working with the homeless, working with the disenfranchised. Women of color, right? Like everyone says, oh, wow, look at Martin Luther King, right? He's doing this thing, blah, blah, blah. But the organization, right? Okay, all the people that we know their names, Ralph David Abernathy, and all the names we know, dudes, right? But the church, the Black church, was then and is now, I'll be nice, 65% women, probably higher, but I'm trying to be nice. And so the foot soldiers of these movements have been women of color, and throughout our history. And I know that, obviously Michael can speak more definitively than I can about, that movement and his movement and the movement but as he said, once again, the names we know tend to be dudes, very often white dudes, but there's this huge number of women of color, whether it be trans women, lesbian, all these women who hold up these movements, and we tend not to know their names, right? If you're lucky, once again, we talk about history. If you're lucky, they'll mention Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, maybe Fannie Lou Haber, if it's a really good school, right? Or if they're doing a good job. You're not getting Bell Hooks,
Shirley Chisholm. Come on, man. Shirley Chisholm. Come on now.
I know about Shirley Chisholm, but I didn't hear about her in school. Not in high school, at least. So there's this gap between what women of color do and the recognition that they receive that isn't closing. Not, or at least not very much. It's probably closed some, but it's not as bad as it was, but it's bad. It is really, really bad. And having worked for about 3 or so years, 3 or so years consecutively, I've done other work in the past, in this space where almost every organization we work with also run by women of color, right? It's almost when I see another guy, it's like, hey, because the animating force, we talked about empathy. The animating force of these sort of empathy-driven organizations in America are almost always women of color, or not say always, but often, very often, are women of color. Partially, like I said, because I think they have realized that if they don't do it, no one will, right? I think that's what it's come down to. This recognizing that if they don't do it, no one will. I am honored and pleased to say that my boss, Tanisha Rowland, and lots of other women that I work with do incredibly difficult work with shockingly low amounts of resources, very little time, and very little peace of mind. And they keep going and they keep pushing. So I want to thank, once again, hug with consent, your student activists, but also hug the women of color who who keep moving forward organizations that are pushing for diversity, inclusion, and reparation of our society.
Well, hey, thank you so much for taking the time, Bill. Make sure that they get your social media before you leave.
Oh, well, mostly I talk about football, but I do occasionally pontificate about other things. I can do more than one thing. So every once in a while, I'll talk about movies and television because I've also been a writer and stuff like that. And I talk a lot about history because I'm sort of obsessed with it. But mostly I talk about football because I'm also obsessed with that. And we always want the thing we can't have. I wanted to be a great player, and instead I was a terrible player, but I loved the game. But you can find me 2 Twitter feeds, no waiting. I guess for the younger folk, you can go to my my younger Twitter feed at capital B, capital C, ARROLL 138 at BCarroll 138. And for the old school, James, I have the old school Twitter feed that's at 11 Bravo. That's ELEVENBRAVO 138. And I would love to keep up with all of you because you're all amazing and fascinating people.
Thank you so much, Bill. I look forward to talking with you again.
Yes, sir.
Michael, your final thoughts on inclusion and how far you think we've come.
I would second what Bill said. As I sat watching in horror in November of this past year, as our country quickly veered toward the cliff of fascism, once again, black women stepped up and saved our asses. And that's the story of America, is black women have stepped up and saved our asses, just even when we deserve to be let to fall on them. This right here tonight is exactly what we need in this country, and that's to sit down and actually listen to one another. Everybody is so focused on having their voices heard, that we don't ever listen anymore. And especially for those of us who are white and quite often in positions of power, we're the last ones to sit down and listen. If we're to form an equitable society, we have to understand where other people are coming from. And through the lens of white privilege, I could never understand what Black Americans have experienced over the course of 400 years of oppression. But I can sit down and listen, and I can start the process of learning. And I can, at that point, begin to take that education that I've gained and begin to affect a real change. So this is, being able to sit down and hear other people's experiences is exactly what the country needs to do. Especially those of us who are white. Oftentimes we are so caught up in our feelings about, getting defensive. Oh, I'm not responsible for white supremacy. Well, yeah, we are, because we're benefiting from it. We may not be out there with a white hood, but we continue to experience the privilege that comes from those white hoods. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. I will definitely be back in touch with you. We have one more show about inclusion, and I want to get everybody in and kind of have everybody get their kind of final thoughts in. But
Yes,
thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your service, my man. You have a great day.
You too, sir.
And I actually saved you for last, Juliana. You are our voice of the future. Young lady, as Bill said, we need a lot more young people getting involved in this not only inclusion, but just our life in general. Maybe you can change things. Maybe you can get people out of the Senate, before they have cobwebs in their ears. When you have to know, when you have to do this to see whether or not you have hair in your ears, you're too old to be in Congress. That's just my thought. But anyway, your final thoughts, Juliana, and I hope to have you back again. I intend to have your brother and your mother on next week, so it's going to be a family affair.
My whole family. Thank you so much for having me. I think that the conversation is really important, and I'm glad that there are people willing to have conversation nowadays, because it seems like up until the past couple of years, this past year or so, it's been a little tough to even start conversation. So I think that's really important, and I feel really honored to be in a place with a rich history of inclusion and social justice. And I'm enjoying learning every single day, learning from you guys, all different perspectives, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And I will continue to fight and try and do my part wherever I can. I think it's important, and I'm excited to see what I can experience and what the world can experience in the future. So
Well,
thank you so much.
thank you. You have a great rest of your week, and yeah, if you want to come on with your mom and your brother next week, that's fine too. But yeah, you have a great week.
Thank you so much. You as
All
well.
right. Yeah. Now, this part of the show, I always dedicate to the San Diego Black Panther Party. And tonight we have Brother Robert Ward Williams, as always. And also we have Humblebee back. So, Brother Williams, I don't know where you want to start at, but there was an article this week that was brought out about the San Diego Police Department. So at some time, I would like for you to address that also. But welcome to the show tonight.
I'll power to the people. We basically just kind of wanted to talk a little bit, and I apologize if you started covering this because I didn't get the feed. A little bit about Juneteenth, basically what that really means, the impact it has on us, and just the idea of it being signed into becoming a national holiday. Um, and I kind of just wanted to let Sister Humblebee give her thoughts on it, being from the younger generation, and then I can double back on it from there.
Okay.
Well, how's the people? How you guys doing?
Doing fine, sister. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, I mean, the events that went on this weekend were amazing. It was good to see so many events going on in San Diego, especially growing up out here. I unfortunately did not know about Juneteenth until I was an adult and I started doing my own research on Black history. So that was a good thing to see. However, when it comes to making it a national holiday, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it due to the fact that it's, it's giving everyone a paid day off. And I feel like, companies are going to go into the Juneteenth specials, getting more money for them. And they're not going to put it into the Black communities who are actually struggling. So, I mean, I feel like we need to have somebody out there giving out the word. If you are someone who is not a part of the Black community, I feel like you should, try to if you want to participate, buy Black owned. Don't make it a day where you go out and you meet someone Black just because it's a Black holiday. But other than that, I feel like it's a milestone. However, I feel like we skipped over a lot of steps. They're trying to pull out Black education in schools, but then you give them a holiday where they need to be, they need to bring the knowledge to the students about what this holiday is and why it's a holiday, but then you're telling them that they can't learn about it anymore. So it's kind of like a half and half. I'm happy about it because I'm happy to see that, we're being recognized, but also, there's some steps that were skipped. And I don't know. I'm a little upset about the steps that were skipped, but especially see everything that happened this weekend. I was able to go to 2 different events. I was able to see how much it has grown versus the last 2 years that I went. It was kind of empty. There was like one event that I knew about, but this year it's definitely bigger, and I appreciate that part.
Brother Williams, can I just, before you tell us your feelings on this, I put up a blog this week, and the blog said no more crumbs. And I put up a plate of chitlins beside it with hot sauce. because I felt that what you was doing was the same thing Master did back in the day. Whenever tensions got high on the plantation, you gave the pickaninnies a holiday. You gave a hog. You let them have, you let them go out in the fields. You made them feel safe. The next day, things ain't changed, but them same pickaninnies is out in the fields, singing and laughing and talking about, oh, look what Master done for us. Now, that was my feelings on this. You want to give me a holiday, but you don't want to let me vote. You know what I'm saying? So actually, you're not giving me nothing. You're just recognizing something that happened to me. And you don't even have the decency to cover it up. The only thing that you did was you cleaned the fecal matter out of the intestines, but you still gave me a plate of shit. Excuse my language. Now you can tell me your feelings on that, Brother Williams.
Well, I actually agree with you, but let me kind of give the background on how I ended up feeling that way.
Okay.
The deal is I was born in Dallas, Texas, so I come from Texas. So coming from Texas, and growing up in Texas, Juneteenth was just something that everybody already knew about before, obviously before things ended up being more or less a national thing. And so in essence, the way we looked at Juneteenth, at least the way I was brought up looking at it, was different simply because I was used to still seeing Klan members dress up in their full garb and actually go out and recruit throughout the community. There was I think I may have mentioned it on the show before, but when I was young, in my early teens, I even remember them the Klans having an actual annual march that they did throughout the city. And so when we thought about Juneteenth, through my family, the idea was kind of like we looked at it kind of like a slap in the face, because our perspective on it was, why are we celebrating being 2 years late to the party? And so I always had a different approach to it. So our thing was, it was more, even though, there are obviously a lot of people who find any reason to celebrate something, hell, for that matter, there's plenty of people that would celebrate Juneteenth. They don't associate with nobody black, just from the simple standpoint that it's another holiday to celebrate. So from a capitalistic standpoint, people are real light, I would say, that are not debt in their lifestyles, would just look at it as just another opportunity to take advantage of a given situation to barbecue. But for those of us, for instance, that grew up seeing it for what it was in Texas, we always, again, we thought of it as a slap in the face. We also, I used to deal with a heightened sense of racism around that time, simply because of Juneteenth. In fact, the reference you gave in regards to chitlins, there was times where we would see things that refer back to chitlins, watermelon, and chicken around Juneteenth, leaflets and stuff like that were being distributed through the community, and just by your local neo-Nazis and Klan members and stuff like that. So they would mock and make fun of the holiday in and around the area where I grew up, and just kind of use it as an opportunity to make fun of the fact that we just found out. So my perspective took a different turn. And when I left Denver as I got older, when I moved, the first city I moved away from was Denver in 2006. And it was actually, I think, right around the middle of January. So like the first weekend in Denver, I found out that they was actually having a Juneteenth celebration. And I went to it because I was actually shocked, because at the time I just did not know that other states celebrated it. And then that was my first introduction to a different type of culture shock period, because the relationships between blacks and whites as you move more toward the west are a lot different than they are in the south. And so I was actually shocked to witness black and white couples celebrating Juneteenth. And so it would just literally took on a whole different meaning as I move more toward the West Coast. And so I feel what you're getting at, and I feel your frustration on that simply because oftentimes what we find is creating an outlet for people to vent, creating an outlet for people to express, oftentimes take away from the actual outlet needed for us to gear our energy toward making change. So to me, I look at that as another aspect of the conquer and divide tactic is you just give people an opportunity to let their frustrations out in some type of capacity that will actually prevent them from using that same energy to take things to the next level, which is oftentimes why I always emphasize we need more people involved in the movement. We don't need more people recognizing they what happened and not doing anything about it, especially using it as an opportunity to just additionally celebrate or another opportunity to partake in capitalism and go up and buy food that you don't need to eat, go out and buy drinks you don't need to do, go out and get drunk, which causes you typically to get arrested. So crime rate goes up around Juneteenth, which causes the police custody rate to go up around Juneteenth, which is contradictory to the whole concept in the first place when you really think about it. But again, that's looking at things from a deeper level. So when I found out that it became a national holiday, I really didn't like Sister Humblebee said, I didn't really know how to take it because I kind of look at it as like I would when I hear about Malcolm X being placed on a stamp. It's on one side of me likes to recognize as someone that I respected growing up, reading about, learning about, and inspired me to be act a part of the movement. But at the same time, when you look at the symbology behind, licking them and then slapping them on something that you're going to send across the states, it's like, really. So we have to really think hard about what these things mean, and also the fact that typically it's just a tactic, kind of like what you're getting at, to where if they give you one thing, it prevents them from having to give you something else. So let me choose and pick the things that I think that we need to allow ourselves to be able to benefit and move forward as a people versus giving us a token, because a lot of the things that we're getting are tokens, but what those tokens tend to do to the masses is they tend to diffuse them, and when you diffuse them, obviously that it's contradictory and contrary to what we really want to see happen, and that's concrete change.
Sister Humblebee, you got something to say to add to that? You seem to have a little different feelings on it than I did. But as I said, I mean, it's a different generation, so.
Yeah, it's a different generation, and also I respect your feelings because you grew up with more knowledge than I did. So of course, I would love to hear everyone else's opinions because I grew up not even knowing what Juneteenth was. So once I figured out what Juneteenth was, of course I wanted to celebrate Freedom Day, but to hear that there were Klansmen doing marches and stuff like that on Juneteenth, it makes me a little more upset that at the fact that the school system is not teaching us. They're not teaching us anything. It's like they want us to erase it. But as Brother Ward said, it's a very confused feeling, especially for someone my age. Like, I'm happy about it, and someone who was raised in California, and unfortunately, school systems that don't care to bring us the real knowledge that we need. It's I don't know. I'm having a little bit of like mixed feelings where, still at the end of the day, it makes me feel happy to see our people come together. Especially with what I saw this weekend. Seeing people from different points of the neighborhood due to the fact that we're finally learning what Juneteenth is. It makes me happy to see everyone come together, but at the same time, to know that this is something that I honestly feel like the government, of course, they're going to approve this now, especially with Biden being in office and he's trying to get the Black people to recognize him. they're going to celebrate it, but people are failing to realize that this is something that's going to benefit them more than it's really going to benefit us.
Uh, I'm going to bring my other guest in here, Bill, Mr. Bill Carroll. Bill's from Chicago. He's a part of my sports family. Bill, what do you think about Juneteenth? Was this a political pacifier?
Well, that's a good way of putting it. Here's what bait and switch. I mean, pick a term. Here's what I'll say. I am, as has been mentioned, I'm glad to see representation and I'm glad to see recognition. But they're on the sort of hierarchy of needs, reminding of what you learned back in sociology class. At the bottom, at the base of the pyramid, you have things that sustain life. Now, there are still basic necessities that have not been provided, right? We still have a huge gap between what it takes to have a healthy Black community and what people actually have around them in terms of resources. And while, like I said, I'm always happy as a person who loves history and appreciates the recognition of anything important in our history, I can think of about 400 things I was more concerned about. And I really wish that this had been combined with some actual resources, something that had real heft, to use an old, missile term, throw weight, right? When they're talking about the how much impact a missile has, they put it in throw weight. This has very little throw weight. It gave people, as was just pointed out by Brother Williams, an extra day to barbecue. That's what, for most people, what it was. I went to I went to an event where, we had people from Simanamalinga Wachanga, we had people from the Black United Fund of Illinois, and a lot of Black businesses. It was a cool event, and I was glad to see it. But I would like to see something that is sustained, right? That's what I care about. Consistency over flash is what I'm concerned about. So tell me what we built by something. I don't want to hear as much about, as he said, it's like the stamp thing. Hey, we're putting Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill. I mean, that's great. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't sustain anything. It doesn't have the ability to be perpetuated over time and to lift people up out of the bad situations, out of the lack of resources, lack of education, lack of information, lack of all these things that are still plaguing the Black community. This doesn't address any of those things enough for me to get too excited.
Brother Williams?
Yeah, I mean, me and Bill kind of see things the same way, and I primarily, like I said, see that because I grew up in Texas, and so it took on a different perspective coming from the place where you were late and finding out how things are going, and so I just always had that perspective. Now, coming here in San Diego again, I even attended. We the Black Panther Party, we attended several events in San Diego here for Juneteenth, and we just use them as an opportunity to engage the people, talk to the people, get them to be more active in the community and to, look at things on a deeper level. So, our position on that is just seize the time and build with our people. Obviously, our people are in celebration mode, but nonetheless, we had to have a presence and wanted to just work with them as much as possible, just be out in their face. And that's kind of our take on a lot of the things that go on, is at least have a presence and maybe be able to spark some people to take things to a greater level.
Do you think that the release of the report by the San Diego Police Department on the same week as we have this double holiday, so to speak, because we got the Friday and the Saturday, do you think that this, that the reason why they released the report at this particular time, even though we knew all along about the practices against minorities and so forth and so on. But do you think that this was a chance for them to release it and not think it had the impact that it should have, such as when they tried to sneak some of the voting laws past us during the last election?
Yeah, I mean, to me, timing is everything. So when it comes to that, you want to try to gauge statistically the best opportunity to do certain things. So I don't think anything happens by chance when it comes to that, because you can always look at historical trends and see that. So it's only a to me a form of a weaponized tactic in timing. And a lot of these kind of things can just be gathered through the algorithms that go on through social media anyway, in terms of how things come together and when things are released. And so I don't know a whole lot about it beyond that, but I would just simply say that to me, it is a matter of timing, intentional timing, in order to do that.
Now that things have gotten back to normal, so to speak, according to law, June 15th was the day when when California itself became very open. Have you seen any changes within the behavior within the Black community, and how have you seen the behavior in general, as far as people getting out, people mixing? Are people still getting vaccinations? Is there still apprehension toward the vaccine? What have we been doing in the Black community here in San Diego since June 15th?
Well, I think that people have been itching and waiting to get out and be more active. To me, one of the things about that has to do with the fact that, for instance, in the industry I deal with, you see sports. People couldn't wait to get back to their sports. Couldn't wait to get back to large gathering events. You
Me and,
know,
me and Bill deal with sports, so you're talking right up our alley. you know.
so I mean, but the thing about that is, I feel like the time when we was able to galvanize and reach the people as a result of them not having some of the entertainment things to shift their energy toward. To me, that's kind of one of the negative aspects, is that people are anxious to get back out and go back to doing the things that they did, and focusing on the things that they did prior to having to be forced to try to look at a bigger picture in terms of what's going on around the world, in terms of the possibility of the United States being behind something, the possibility of capitalism collapsing to a certain degree. And so what happens is people's focus will now go back to shifting to a lifestyle that makes them less active in terms of bringing empowerment, which is, again, to me, right inside with making Juneteenth a holiday, because right now football opens back up, basketball opens up, baseball opens up, Juneteenth's a holiday. Celebrate. It just puts people back in the mode. Clubs are opening back up. It's all of the things that kept us in situations that would not allow us to now think more about how we make change and how we make a difference. So those are the kind of the things that I don't look forward to, is going that sense of normalcy that puts us back in positions of complacency as Black people. Those are my issues. Is that, well, what are we going to take away from when we were pent up, when there were more marches, when more people were actually paying attention to the political process? What's going to happen with that over the next year or two? Or those things are going to kind of go back to norm in terms of people not being involved in it as well, and then all you left with is just the hardcore people that was involved prior to COVID, prior to getting shut down, prior to the Black Lives Matters protests. So to me, it's kind of just like, let's see how this moves forward, and what were the people that did become active during these past couple of years? What would the takeaway be for them? What would they do now to work toward reaching the masses? So I'm kind of like, let's see how this goes, and that's where I am with that.
Speaking of your state of Texas, there, they just had a fight down there recently, and they had 73,000 people in the stadium with no mask and no social distance. So that was the Canelo fight, and I think it would have been more if they could have gotten more in there, but it's Florida's the same way. Where you have these big crowds coming into sporting events. So as you said, it's interesting to see, how many people will really think about, how much they're at risk. But the one thing about these, I have no sympathy for these sporting guys. If you're making $1 million and you can't afford to get a COVID test, or you think it costs, then you shouldn't be playing basketball or whatever you're playing. With it. So, but anyway, that's just some of my ideas on that. But Bill, what do you think about these sports fans being allowed back in, and is it too soon, or now we're supposed to have another variant, and most of the time this involves some type of travel, which means that you're going to be at an airport, you're going to be taking some type of public transportation, or even if it's private transportation to and from, the fight. So what's your thoughts on, are we opening up too fast or what?
To quote the chorus from Act 1, Scene 3 of Cabaret, song by Sally Bowles. A mark again, a buck or a pound, it makes that clinking, clanking sound that makes the world go round. Money makes the world go round. Makes the world go round. For those who are unfamiliar with the musical Cabaret, but it's a money thing. I mean, what do you want me to say?
Absolutely.
It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. If we truly cared about people's health and safety, we would still be being careful, right? We would still be taking all these precautions we took before, back when people were taking it seriously. But at some point, money wins. Welcome to America.
Humble B, come on back in here. Give us a young perspective.
So I was listening, of course, to everything, but going back into the whole question about people being vaccinated, as a younger person, I'm on social media and I have people from different communities, and I have noticed that there has been a major pushback when it comes to the Southeast community. I've seen a lot of our younger Black generation where they are not okay with the vaccination, and basically they're trying to shame anyone who is agreeing to get vaccinated. And then when you jump to the whole sports thing, I'm fully vaccinated. I took a public transportation to go to one of the games, and I'm on the trolley and I'm noticing, or our public train, and I'm noticing a lot of people that are only put the mask on when they see security come by. And I'm pretty sure some of the people that I've seen, I'm almost positive they're not one of the people that are vaccinated. So it's like, of course, we want to get everything back open. And I'm one of those people that I took the steps because, for one, I have a great grandfather that I want to see. And also, I want to move forward. But a lot of people in the community, I've noticed they're doing a major pushback. I've seen videos, memes, everything like that, where they're just shaming anyone who is agreeing to get vaccinated.
Brother Williams, one of the problem that I have with that is that you're still giving your kids smallpox vaccine to get in school. You're still giving them shots in order for them to go to school. Now, one of the things I tell people is, first of all, I didn't get the vaccine for you. I got the vaccine for me. Okay. I'm almost 74 years old. I got a heart condition. I got a bad kidney. I got the vaccine for me.
Yeah.
Now, if it happens to benefit you, that's fine. But I want to live. So, now you can make fun of me if you want to. That's fine. But if I know I have pre-existing conditions, and I don't protect myself, then it's just like the artist, as Sun Tzu says, you have to prepare for the act of war. So this is a war against my body. I have to do something to protect that. Now, like I said, this is my personal choice. You might not have the same choice, but at least I've done what I needed to do for me. How do you feel about that?
Well, my feelings on that is that it just goes into, I like the idea of being able to make that choice myself. So I want to have the power to be able to say, okay, if I want the vaccine, get it. If I don't, I shouldn't have to get it. Especially uh coming from a situation, again, like you said, it's a personal choice. My whole family ended up getting COVID, and it didn't do nothing to us. None of us. I mean, I felt a little sleepy the first day, and that might have simply been because I went and took the test and just felt like something ought to be going on with me. um, and so I had to go through the quarantine, obviously. But that was just my experience with it. And so from that standpoint, I also hear that once you've had it, your body develops antibodies. So from that standpoint, if I have the antibodies, I don't feel I need to get it. But I don't push that on anybody. I've also known some people that did get it that died. My martial arts grandmaster, Hate Kalinde, out of um, Detroit, he passed away from it. A few other people I knew in Texas passed away from it. So I do see there to being a sense of urgency with it. And from that standpoint, I feel like, especially as it applies to other people, it's probably more so in your best interest to get it than to not. My biggest concern with the shot has to do with the younger generation, just with the fact that we're dealing with something that modifies your RNA. And so, my biggest concern is, how does it affect not the generation that gets the shot, but the future generation of their offspring? Is there some possibility that there's some side effects that may not be transpired until you have a child, and then that child comes of age? But these are the things that we're kind of stuck with. But given that there's a lot of background.
Who's that?
I don't know.
Bill, is that you? Hold on, I'm not sure.
Yes. People have decided since Juneteenth rolled around to have a personal Fallujah. So yeah, I've been getting incoming mortar fire the last couple of days.
I was getting ready to say, it almost sound like somebody's shooting over there. It's like,
Welcome to Chicago, but yes, you get a little bit every day.
All right. Well, basically, what I was getting at is that I see the need for people to get it. I see the need to do what you must do to protect yourself as an individual. Again, I think it's, as long as it's a personal choice and a choice, that's my thing. I don't like the idea of it being mandatory to have to get it. So that's when I start having concern, when you start creating situations where you make it mandatory. So that's really all I can say on that. I talk to people and I say it's an individual thing. For some people, I think it is the best thing that you do. Others, I say, hey, if you're like myself, to where it didn't do anything to you, then maybe you don't necessarily need to get it. My attitude: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's kind of just where I am with it, and I left it at that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's a personal choice. So, like you said, it's and it's not like we don't have an example to be rather apprehensive.
Right.
But it's very interesting, that like I said, we have a new holiday, but tomorrow, I believe it comes time to vote on the Voting Act, and everyone in the GOP has said already that they're going to be against it. But yet, Juneteenth passed by unanimous.
Yep.
So once again, are you going to tell me that we weren't kind of thrown a crumb off the master's plate? But that's an old pessimist talking there. But as always, we missed you last week, Brother Williams, and unfortunately, I got in touch with you a little too late to learn about the Juneteenth celebrations that you guys were going to have over there. But one thing I did, I had contacted you earlier, and I asked you a question about black companies here, and I even though I did, target something specific, why don't we have a black business directory here in San Diego?
That is a very good question, and like one of the things that we're going to have to start doing is creating that. The closest thing I can come up with is all black org, which is like a social network that we have to where black businesses and black organizations are reaching out to each other to kind of sort of do the best they can in network. But that's that is still not at the level it should be. And I feel like even, not so much just San Diego, but these just kind of tend to be the problems that we have across the United States. And a lot of it just has to do, I feel like also has to do with just I would call the nature of capitalism, because the nature of capitalism also pins people against each other as it applies to all of us, typically competing against business from one another. So those same aspects, I think, go into that, especially when you start dealing with the fact that you may have the same footprint type of businesses multiple times over and over that we're experiencing. And unfortunately, I think us as black people, we're not the best capitalists. We're the best consumers, but obviously we're not the best capitalists. So when you look at a situation where the black dollar is competing against itself with a small percentage of black people in general, these kind of things I think subconsciously play a factor in us not coming together as a people, as well as I've even heard some black business owners talk about how they don't want to advertise themselves as being a black business and catering to black people simply because they think that that's going to shun away their larger consumer base. So there's various things going on from that standpoint that you have to think about, but we definitely need to create a push for us to come together and organize as black business owners, simply because there are so few of us, simply because we need to create a way to increase the circulation of the black dollar in our community. And I just think it's time that we make a more of a concentrated effort to do so. So yeah, I'm going to be working on that and then reaching out to a few people that are have somewhat of a model established so that we can network better as a community, because with numbers come strength.
But Brother Williams, this is the age of social media.
Right.
Instantaneously, you can connect. We had a Green Book back in the 70s, before social media.
Right.
So, I mean, doesn't that seem like, if we can have a Green Book in the 70s and we can't connect as black businesses in 2021?
One thing I can say as far as someone who is on social media is we have a page on Facebook in San Diego called what is it? I think it's Black San Diego. And
Right.
even on there, anytime someone posts anything, it's so much negativity. People will knock the business. And then, as I've mentioned before, there is a business out here where it's a black-owned family restaurant, and they denied us posting anything in the business area that pertains to just black people, because they said that they didn't want to make it like seem like anyone who is not black isn't welcomed. But one thing that I want a lot of black businesses to understand is when you go to Chinatown or Koreatown or anything like that, none of those business owners are worried about their menus being in their language or them posting any type of Chinese or Korean events, because of the simple fact that they know that they have to put their people first, and they have to make sure that they are putting money back in their own pockets before they worry about any other race. And I feel like the black community needs to do the same. We need to make it known that it is okay to take care of our own, because once you take care of your own, then you can worry about others.
Yeah, well, very few Chinese restaurants I know serve hamburgers. You know,
Exactly.
I'm just saying. But let's everybody get their kind of final thoughts together this for this week. I was thinking, Juneteenth, thinking about inclusion, the difference between inclusion and integration, if there is any. Also, we've been talking about critical race theory that we will have our discussion on more next week. It'll be our second series, our second series. But Bill, once again, thanks for staying with us the whole time. You've been with us since 6, and you and well, actually, since 9. So it's getting a little bit after 11 up there in Chicago. So once again, why don't you give us your final thoughts? Let us, kind of tell people where they can find you. When you're not doing football and that. Of course, you will be here Thursday on the Sports Crib. I'll give you that shameless plug. So,
yes, sir. Sir. Well, I won't go too deeply into it because you said you're going to have a whole segment on it in the future. But I have lately been jousting, I guess, verbally and socially with people who are concerned or frightened or whatever, distraught about critical race theory, including some people who are Black. And most of them can't even accurately define critical race theory. Unfortunately, it has become a boogeyman, in essence. And the analogy I use is when a child hears a tapping at the window, looks on the wall across from where their bed is and sees a monster and gets frightened. And then when you come into the room, you point to them that it's a squirrel on the branch in the tree, and the light is casting a shadow that's frightening them. Critical race theory is simply the study of history with the understanding the impact race has had on history. That's it. You don't have to be afraid. It's not going to come and hurt you. It's not going to teach you to hate. It's not going to, divide your friendships or make your credit card decline, or I don't know what people are afraid of. I really don't. I don't get it. I don't. Like your breath won't smell worse. Like, what do you think critical theory is going to do to you people? But you should not be afraid of any line of inquiry or any thought. I read lots of people that I do not agree with. I've read books by William Buckley. I've read Ayn Rand. Ugh. But I did.
I read. I read Thomas Sowell. Can you imagine that? I actually read Thomas Sowell, so
Right, exactly. I wasn't afraid of it. I mean, it's okay to encounter ideas that you may not agree with. It's all right. It's the same people who are constantly talking about freedom of speech, this, and I'm a libertarian, that, and I'm a constitutional conservative, that, who are out here trying to ban a way of thinking about the world and thinking about American history. We live in wild times. You can find me on Twitter a lot. Once again, 2 Twitter feeds, no waiting. So Humble B for the younger generation. I've got capital B, capital Z, ARR. So that's capital B, capital C, ARR, OLL 138. That's at BCarroll 138. And for the OGs, like my man James, the original OG Twitter feed, which is at 11 Bravo. That's at ELEVEMBRAVO 138. That's the word, not the number 11 Bravo. And as always, it's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure.
Thank you, Bill. Humble B, you want to give us your final thoughts? Tell us, about how you feel about Juneteenth, how you feel about things coming up.
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, listening to you guys, different generations and people who didn't grow up in San Diego or California, period. There's things that needs to be done. It gives me more encouragement to get out there and make sure that our youth has more knowledge on what's going on. So that way, it's not like how I'm feeling right now, where I'm at a crossroads. I'm so confused. I'm, a little frustrated about the things that I didn't know. And also, we need to work. I just feel like there's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially when it comes within our community. As you said, we have our sources for social media. However, it's about getting our community to accept each other and support each other right now, because even with having social media, having black-owned businesses right now, it's kind of hard because unfortunately the younger generation black community tears each other down so bad.
And Brother Williams, you can give us our final thoughts for the evening and take us home.
All right. I want to just poke a little jab at Via on a lighter note, because he said that critical race theory, knowing it, is not going to make you get denied on credit. But I had a conversation with this sister, with a white lady, about 2 weeks ago, and I swear to you that I had her so wrapped up into being accepting the fact that it was okay, that she wanted to start supporting black people, that with the white folks that was standing around watching us as she walked away, seeing how I won her over, I would swear to you that her credit score did drop. So I don't know if I agree with you. I want to say that your credit score.
Well, that's a true ally, then, brother. If she was willing to accept a credit drop in order to be a good ally.
So I did want to say that now the Black Panther Party, I want to go ahead and promote this real quick. We are having a back to school supply community drop off this Wednesday, June 23rd, from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Martin Luther King Jr. Park, which is at 6401 Skyline Drive in San Diego. Just bring different types of school supplies, and a lot of the stuff that we plan to get, we're going to be donating to one of the African-centered schools called Beta Salam here in San Diego. I don't think there's enough recognition as well as enough push for us to work toward educating our own. And anytime that we have people that are doing the work of educating the next generation, especially our people, we want to do whatever we can to assist with that. So bring brand new school supplies, flash drives, color pencils, rulers, highlighters, pencils, pencil sharpener, loose leaf paper, just your typical school supplies, and drop it off with us so that we can help out wherever we can. Again, that's this Wednesday, June 23rd, from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Martin Luther King Jr. Park, 6401 Skyline Drive, right there in the parking lot next to the swimming pool.
Are you accepting book bags?
Yes, book bags is on that list as well. I apologize. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's very important for kids that are going to school nowadays. So, any other social things that we should know about the Black Panther Party, and any membership drives or anything of that nature coming up?
Not anything I can put out right now as far as that goes. But again, like when we met out with the community this weekend, we're always networking. We're always looking for people that are willing to help and engage and get active in the community. So to me, it's all about being active, whether you're a Panther or not. We just need more people fighting the good fight. Like yourself, James, and Bill. We just need more of us out there. So by all means, let's do this, and let's keep reaching out people, and let's hope that in addition to opening back up and going to our usual sport activities, we open back up and now start hitting a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of concerned toward making things better for ourselves, and let's not take the bait of just, letting our energy diffuse because we got an additional holiday to eat barbecue. But let's be more active, especially as it applies to, like you said, right on the back of what's happening with our voting rights. So,
Yep.
you give us one thing and you snatch something else. And like I said, I would rather us decide what we get versus what gets taken away. So let's see through the cloud and do some work.
Yes, sir. And I would like to thank our audience tonight, all the people that were involved in our discussion on inclusion, Miss Juanita Fry, Melissa Smith, Bill, you, of course, and Michael North. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to talking to you again next Monday when our topic will be CRT versus culturally reformed theory. So have a great night, everyone, and look forward to talking to you next week.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. How about the people?
Good night, all power to the people.